Konami's Collectors Series, Castlevania and Contra was a compilation disc released in 2002 for PCs. The disc contained 5 classic NES games: Castlevania, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, Contra, and Super C. And for its day, it was a modestly competent collection of NES games, and still worked back in 2011 when I did a little video on this ages ago. And then once upon a time, it saw a re-release on GOG.com just a short while ago this year for a little over $5, which is odd considering this came along after Konami had already put out 2 anniversary collections representing the Castlevania and Contra series. But both these collections, while boasting more material, cost a little more per collection, and this re-release is fairly cheap, but is it worth it in 2020? Well, the easy answer would be no, of course not, but let's dive into it. So to reiterate, you're getting 5 classic NES games in this 2002 compilation, and that's all you're getting: 3 Castlevanias and 2 Contras, because nobody cared about Contra Force apparently, but that's neither for here or now. In terms of the actual games, they're pretty much ROMs running off a fairly basic emulator and front end, playing at full screen resolution with the only display option being control over your gamma levels. There are no windowed options, no resolution settings, no aspect ratio settings, no scanline options, none of the features that people would want to fiddle around with today, because back in 2002, to be honest, nobody gave a shit. If it ran, and ran well, that's all that really mattered. And believe me, as someone who bought the CD version back in 2002, having a collection of NES games that ran well on my old shitbox Pentium, and having the entire picture fill on my monitor without the edges getting cut off, that was more than enough for me. Hell, even back in 2011 when I was running this off Windows XP, I still had no issues because it at least looked good on my old tube TV, and that's all that mattered. And yes, I'm running it today in 2020 on my rinky-dink Windows 10 tower thing, and no errors, which I've heard from other people they had direct draw errors, but I've not come across that as of yet. So I guess I'm just lucky. Aside from that, your only other options are volume adjustment, button customization for both keyboard and joystick if one is ready to go, although be advised that if one were to use an Xbox or Xbox-like controller, the D-pad doesn't work, so you'll have to use the left analog stick to do your usual D-pad things, which isn't the greatest or most ideal, but it does work, I suppose. If you want to use the D-pad, you'll have to find some workaround. Oh, and you can also save up to 5 save states per game, which is one advantage over the more recent anniversary collections, which only allows you 1 per game. And with regards to the emulation, by 2002 standards, it's pretty solid. There might be occasional glitches in the sound output, but for the most part, the emulation runs fairly accurate to the source material. Emulation back in the day wasn't as refined as it is now, so there's bound to be some hiccups, but nothing that could be considered game-breaking. As a test, I played the final boss fight in Dracula's Curse. The lasers came out alright, which is all fine and dandy and not a big deal at first, but when the game graced the Wii Virtual Console in the mid to late 2000s, you play that same final battle and the lasers come out awkwardly and broken and stuff, which is not a good thing in particular, but whatever. That's what we're gonna get as a hardy personality, I suppose. That having been said, the ROMs themselves have undergone some slight edits, mostly in regards to updating the copyright information and also removing all the Konami logos from the title screens and stuff. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest got a couple more edits than usual, including a long-standing typo finally getting a fix in 2002, only to be promptly forgotten about almost 2 decades later. Oh well. Actually, looking at it now, the colors on the older collection is more accurate to the NES original than the anniversary collections, where the grays are a little more white. Who cares? They also redid the password system, removing some vowels and consonants and filling them with random symbols. I've heard people complain about this once upon a time because it apparently makes all those other passwords that you would get from other versions of Simon's Quest almost entirely useless. But that's not entirely accurate. See, all they did was replace some letters and numbers with other letters, numbers, and symbols, so with some work you can easily convert the codes to work in this version of the game without a hitch, although it is more effort than it's actually worth, especially if you're playing for the long haul, I suppose. The overall presentation is adequately functional at best. Not much more than that. You have a Konami logo, a title screen, and a menu with a little preview of what the planet is and stuff, and the most generic typeface in a program you could get. Konami's Collectors Series Castlevania and Contra was a perfectly adequate, if not bare-bones, collection of emulated NES games for 2002, but is perhaps not quite the ideal collection for today. Yes, it's a cheap collection for 5 games, the emulation's imperfect yet solid despite the lack of options, the extra save slots per game is a nice convenience, and it's on GOG, which means no DRM. On its own merits, for anyone who just wants a working collection of NES games on their PC, it's a fine, cheap, bare-bones offering. That having been said, it's difficult to recommend this collection to anyone who wants to sample some old-school Castlevania and Contra games in today's day and age and whatever, especially when there are 2 such collections that, while pricier, feature more games per pack than what this has to offer, and at the very least, will more than likely work with your modern system just fine, since some of these older Windows programs tend to be finicky at times, though I've had no problem running these myself. Naturally, there'd be no reason to sample this collection if you already have the other 2, unless you just want a cheaper alternative and have money to burn, I guess, I suppose, I don't know. Your mileage will ultimately vary on this one. But if you just want a collection of old NES games on your PC for dirt cheap and you rather not have any Steam DRM to go along with it, Konami's Collector Series Castlevania and Contra gets the job done adequately enough. Otherwise, I'd suggest going for the Anniversary Collections instead. Pricier, but they have more games and there's more bang for your buck.